So Ross Perot just died not too long ago. And he's like this fascinating politician. He's got a really controversial legacy. Liberals tend to remember him as this run the government like a business guy and a progenitor to the Trump archetype. Republicans remember him as the guy who cost them the White House and basically invented the Clintons. And for those who long for a world in which the choices to vote for president that could actually win aren't just Republicans and Democrats, he represented maybe the last best chance at breaking that duopoly. And yet there was this one little thing on his Wikipedia that stuck out to me that I had no idea about. A poll. In June, Perot led a Gallup poll of all presidential candidates running for the office with 39% of the vote. Wait, what? H. Ross Perot led the 1992 race against the sitting president and somebody that would eventually go on to be a two-term president? June of an election year, 5 months before Election Day. Now, it's kind of weird because I'm looking at it through my own prism. This is 2019. We have a lot of political media these days. People pay attention to politics a lot earlier than they ever have been. And we pay attention to polls more than we ever have in the past. So this might have slipped by, and that's why nobody really talks about it like a big deal. But just think about it. In the modern world, somebody unaffiliated with the Republicans and the Democrats leading both nominees with 5 months to go. It would be the biggest news story, not just in America, in the world. Here's how the New York Times describes the poll in question. In a telephone poll of 815 registered voters nationwide conducted June 4th to the 8th, Mr. Perot was supported by 39%, Mr. Bush 31%, and Mr. Clinton by 25%. It goes on. No previous independent or third-party candidate has ever placed second, much less first, in nearly 6 decades of Gallup's nationwide polling for president. Now, I knew that Perot did well in 1992. I remember that he ended with 19% of the vote, but I never knew he was leading. Did the GOP kidnap his dog and threaten to kill it if he didn't drop out of the race? They didn't. But the truth is even stranger. First, a little background on the 1992 election. George H.W. Bush at that point was only a year and a half away from being the most popular president in American history, literally by the numbers. He scored an 89% presidential approval rating. That was after the Gulf War. But a year and a half of a sluggish economy and some inter-party infighting had really left him vulnerable.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
On the Democratic side, Bill Clinton's a controversial figure. Sure, he'd outmaneuvered presumptive nominee Paul Tsongas and once and future California Governor Jerry Moonbeam Brown, but dude's got baggage coming out of the governor's mansion in Arkansas.
There's 270 miles of Arkansas rivers that are polluted with fecal coliform bacteria and are unsafe for humans or fish.
Mr. Clinton, do you want to take a swing at all that stuff?
Enter Perot, an eccentric Texas billionaire who actually made his money in computers and not oil. For whatever reason, everybody thinks that you make your billions in Texas with oil, which I guess a lot of them, but not Perot. He did computers. He's a computerman. With a very simple message. The country is broken and getting worse, and either party wants to fix it. He tells Larry King, of which he's a frequent guest, that he will run for president if there is a grassroots movement to petition his name onto the ballot in all 50 states. Even as he's raising money, he rejects any donation over $5 and pledges to fund everything else by his own wealth. He balks at the idea of spending money on commercials, saying, why would I do that when I can go on the Today Show for free? And that's despite hiring Hal Riddy, one of the best media specialists of his age. That dude worked for Reagan and made the Morning in America ad, still considered among the gold standard in political advertising.
It's morning again in America.
As well as ads for Wine Cooler, Bartles and James, baby!
If you don't like the name, please don't tell us because we've already printed up our labels.
Perot becomes a folk hero. But there is one hidden motivation for why he'd want to run for president. And it's the kind of feud that could only grow as big in the ego-drenched, big money world of 1980s Texas. Ross Perot hated the Bush family, and the feeling was mutual. Perot believed that fellow Houston bigwig George H.W. Bush had used his position as CIA director in the 70s to spy on Perot. This led Perot to hiring a private investigator in 1980 to look into the Bush family. Now, after 2 terms as vice president for Bush and a successful election by himself, George H.W. Bush was running for re-election. He couldn't hide behind Reagan anymore. For Perot, it was time to move. Perot's campaign was far from perfect, to say the least. He constantly frustrated his staff by going off his prepared remarks and really stepped in it during an NAACP conference in Nashville when he referred to the audience as "you people." And yet, there he was, in June, leading the race. Not only on the cusp of making history, but quite possibly reshaping politics for the next 2 decades now that we know how it actually turned out. And within a month, it was all gone. A Washington Post article not but a month from that leading poll tells the story. His campaign managers complained that he wouldn't spend money where he was supposed to, that he wouldn't stick to his scripts, that he wouldn't take directions, and he fired media specialist Hal Rennie.
Please don't tell us because we've already printed up our labels.
Word further leaked that Perot had become paranoid. One of his campaign chairmen, Ed Rollins, after he quit, said that he'd been asked to sign a loyalty pledge, that it was suspected amongst the campaign that he was, you guessed it, a CIA plant with ties to Bush, there to sabotage the campaign. Ross Perot went on the Larry King Live show and announced that he would no longer run for president. His lead evaporated to single digits, and for all intents and purposes, the moment was lost. Of course, Perot re-enters the race in October. He spends lavishly on these network half hours where he can show charts directly to the American people. He debates. He loses. But I couldn't help but think, what could have been different if Perot maintained his momentum? Would we have different lanes for candidates that dared to violate party orthodoxy? How would the Democrats and Republicans have handled such a humbling, maybe no Clintons, possibly no Bushes? But we'll never know.